Welcome to Performance EV. Today we're taking our inverter and trying to get it into the car. Welcome to the channel. Again, thank you so much for watching this. For those of you new to this channel, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor into a Porsche 911, and over the last couple of months at this point we've gradually been looking at getting the motor in place, and now we're looking at how to actually get it hooked up. So the two key things that need to do with the motor is get electrical power into it and get mechanical power out of it. So in this video I'm going to look at getting the electrical power into it, and that's via the inverter. So if you're interested in this stuff and you haven't already seen the series I did on actually getting the motor spinning, albeit slowly, using the open source inverter, I'll attach a link to that up above. But what we need to do is get the inverter being able to send power to the motor, which is relatively simple. It's 3 cables. But then probably even more importantly, we need to get a lot of signal wires and everything sent to the inverter so it knows what it needs to do. So yeah, let's go take a look, figure out where we're going to fit it, and then figure out how we're going to go about getting it connected up. The motor is only part of the equation. We also need to find somewhere to put the inverter. So yeah, we want to be quite economical with packaging everything to make as much room as possible for battery. So let's see what our options are for fitting this. Okay, so one option is to do something similar to what Nissan originally had, which is inverter on top of the motor. Obviously we can't fit it exactly on top because space doesn't offer, and also I've removed most of the metal that it's attached to. But this is a possibility. Obviously it's coming somewhat into the space here that I'd hope for battery, but I would have space below it, and I guess to either side. The probably main advantage of this is a very short distance between the inverter and the battery itself, and likewise very little cabling required to go between the inverter and the motor. Another option would be to look in behind the motor. Obviously certain areas are just out of limits because of size, dimensions. Not really enough space up above this mount. We could certainly have a look below it, and maybe to either side of it. Alright, behind the motor is a bit of a bust. That's not going to be happening. There is actually very little space here. Potentially, depending on the cells I use, I might be able to fit a battery cell or 2 back here, but that's probably the extent of it. So it looks like we're going to have to encroach a little bit on the engine bay and put it above the motor, which isn't exactly a bad thing. That will make mounting it a little bit easier. So after trialing a bunch of different options, both on and off camera, I think having the inverter sitting on top of the battery box is probably going to end up being our best option. Things like this AC compressor will eventually go, so I will probably end up just having all of the kind of key electrical components, so the inverter, junction boxes, that sort of thing, in this space, to allow us to have a nice, easy access to them whenever we need it. So yeah, so I think we're not going to fit any brackets in place or anything for it at the moment, but I think we can start figuring out our kind of wiring routing and maybe get some wires together for it. Slight change in the orientation just to make sure that things clear the deck lid and things like that. But yeah, it's not a bad space. It actually means that we can mount probably a half to 2/3 of it against existing structures within the car, and so we don't have to build too much by way of new brackets. Hopefully I can get away without having to build a bracket until we've got the battery box in place. To think about the wiring and routing it. So basically, I guess there's 3 main connection points, as we saw when we really dug deep into the inverter. You've got the 3 phases for the motor. So I think having the inverter over this side of the engine bay works, because that's also the side of the motor where the wires need to go in. So these will essentially go up along here and down into the motor, hooking up there. So that's not too long a stretch. Then we've got the battery DC power in from the battery, and that actually is on the bottom, so it's down behind here, but we can have something to connect onto that before we put the inverter in place. And then we've got the data, so that all the signals in and out of the inverter. So this is where the original Leaf connector used to live. I'm not planning on reusing the Leaf connector because I actually want to have it, I want to keep the old logic board as is, in case I decide either for this or another project that I want to reuse it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new plate here with an amp seal connector, wire that up, and then wire from the amp seal connector out. So I would say we'll have the loom that comes out of this connected somewhere up around here, and then we'll run it along in behind the sound deadening, along the top of the bay, down to the right hand side of the transmission tunnel where the cables for the transmission data used to come in. So some of it will branch off to go down to the motor, and we can do that at the back of the bay, and then the rest will go into the car, either heading all the way up to the front of the car throttle pedal, or going to where the ECU was to try and hook into the main loom there. So here's what we're kind of going for. So I'll need to create a plastic plate for the actual amp seal header to connect to, but that's not going to be too difficult. And then we'll ultimately connect it up between the logic board and this, and then we'll have the connector here, which will have a loom on it, and as I say, we'll run down to about here, and we'll just then be able to plug that in there like so, and that will be all of our data connections pretty much sorted. And there is an outer piece that goes on this that I'll see if I can reuse. So now we're going to go measure up the wires and start to build ourselves a loom. So to figure this wiring out, we're just going to have to get measurements to a range of different places in the engine bay and in the car, and then compare this to the list of connection points, and then see what length we need for each one. So in order to do the measuring, we're going to use some cable, and no, this isn't any of the wire that I'm going to use for actually wiring the car. This is normal household cabling for mains stuff, but it's nice and long, and it can be bent into shape, which will help us here. So for the main cabling, we're talking about $1.30 m, $1.40 m, to get it up and over the engine cleanly. Now I just want to look at the wire from the motor, so that the inverter knows what the motor is doing. Although if we went this way instead of up and over, so have it as a separate bit of the loom, that would probably work. Alright, I'll think about that. I may do that initially, and then if it doesn't work, disconnect it and move it out. I don't yet have the new throttle in place, but just for argument's sake, here it is. Looks exactly like the old one. The big difference is this piece here, which is the e-throttle. So I believe this fits up in under the dash, this piece here, which, looking at it now, I really hope I don't have to take apart the dash again to fit it, but we'll see. So I think what I need to do is work on the assumption that basically probably halfway up the dash, in line with here, is where the wires are going to come out, and then we're going to want to run them down and through. Now fortunately for me, in this car there's actually plenty of space underneath the various components for routing wires and cables, so I can actually go pretty directly. I don't have to, as long as I'm willing to take up the carpet, I don't have to just stick to the perimeter or anything like that. And it's about it's about down here where the it's about down here where the cable goes out to the car, or to the outside of the car. So another area where we'll try and connect into the loom from is just here. So these are the ECUs, and obviously you can see they've got wires coming in here. A lot of those wires are now redundant because there's no engine, but some of them will be connecting out of the ECU to other parts of the car, and I'll probably want to connect into those. And then one other area that we might need to take signals from is the gear shifter. So let's get that measured up. Some of the measurements I took, I've come up with a list of all the kind of wires we need. I've got an idea of what voltage they need, and then therefore what length we need to have them. So the next step is really to get some wires cut to the right length, mark them off as to what they are, and then start building the loom. So now we have a huge mess of wires. We can get on with the, I guess, more interesting part, though it is very tedious, so I might not capture it all on camera, of building out the connector. So we've got our amp seal connector here. We've got our terminals. We've got our wires, and now we just need to make them all sit together. I'll go through a couple of them just so you can see how I'm doing it, but I'll probably do the rest of this off camera. These are the female terminals. The male ones are going to be attached to the circuit board with wire and solder. And what we want to do is connect the wire cut the wire rather. And then crimp these on. Now T does have their own crimping tool for this, which I think if I was going to do more than a handful of these connectors, I probably would look at investing in. But for one or two, as long as you're careful, you can make it work with just normal hand tools. So basically making sure that this section is pulled out. If you have made the connector before, you can kind of prise it up. When that's pulled out, crimp on the terminal, push it in through the watertight connector, and keep pushing it in until it clicks properly in place. And that's it. So as I say, I'm going to build out the rest of this. I'm not going to complete it because I need to bring in the wires from the resolver and motor temperature sensors. And I did run out of wire for two of the things I want to do, so I need to get a little bit more of a suitable gauge to get that done. But yeah, that's how we build out the connector. All right, that feels like real progress. I know we still have basically the same job to do, but on the inside of the inverter to get the connector hooked up to the circuit board. But from the perspective of getting us in a position where we can run the motor in the car, this is really a big step forward. It's quite a tedious task building out a loom like this, so great to get it out of the way. Still need to install it. Before doing that, I want to make it a bit more robust, so tape it up and make sure that it can stand the rigors of what it'll have to go through, and then we'll look to install it at some point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed the video and the series. If you have, please, and you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. As always, comments are appreciated, and I do read them all and try and respond where I can. And I do take on board, as you've seen on many videos, I do take on board some of the ideas that have been put forward, which are really great. But yeah, until next time, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.